Allison Camerata and John Berman.
All right, welcome to our viewers in the United States and all around the world. This is New Day. It's Wednesday, October 9th. It is 6 o'clock here in New York, and this is war. That is the message from the White House to Democrats who were leading the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. But the important thing is that this is not just war on Democrats. This morning, you will hear from impeachment experts and Republicans who used to work on Capitol Hill that this is war on the Constitution. In a letter that one Republican lawyer describes as a dumpster fire / legal war crime, the White House writes it is refusing to cooperate in any way, shape, or form with the congressional investigation. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi responded overnight, saying efforts by the Trump administration to hide the truth will be regarded as further evidence of obstruction of justice. Overnight, House Democrats subpoenaed a key witness in the case, Ambassador Gordon Sondland, after President Trump blocked his congressional testimony. The White House letter suggests they will also block other key witnesses from testifying this week.
CNN also has brand new reporting about that July 25th phone call between President Trump and Ukraine's president that led to this impeachment inquiry. A source confirms that the whistleblower wrote a memo saying that a White House aide who was on that call, who listened in to that phone call, described the conversation as, quote, crazy and frightening, and said it apparently left him shaken. CNN has also learned that months before that call, President Trump directed Energy Secretary Rick Perry and two top State Department officials to circumvent official diplomatic channels and instead deal with Rudy Giuliani. So let's begin our coverage with CNN's Suzanne Malveaux live on Capitol Hill. Another crazy day. Suzanne.
Another crazy day, Allison. Good morning. Well, the White House is obstructing the impeachment inquiry, and they say because they believe that this exercise is unconstitutional. So now the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her caucus, they are facing a major challenge as to how to move forward.
President Trump continuing to stonewall House Democrats in their investigation efforts. The White House sending a scathing letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and House committees refusing to cooperate, calling the impeachment inquiry illegitimate and unconstitutional. Pelosi sending her own strongly worded warning, writing, "Mr. President, you are not above the law. You will be held accountable."
The president is obstructing Congress from getting the facts that we need. That is an abuse of power for him to act in this way. And that is one of the reasons that we have an impeachment inquiry.
The war of words heating up after the White House blocked the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, from appearing before 3 House committees on Tuesday. His attorney writing in a statement, Ambassador Sondland is profoundly disappointed that he will not be able to testify. House Democrats immediately issuing a subpoena to the ambassador.
The failure to produce this witness, the failure to produce these documents, we consider yet additional strong evidence of obstruction.
But a defiant President Trump claiming he wanted Sondland to testify, blaming the Democrats in a tweet, writing, unfortunately, he would be testifying before a totally compromised kangaroo court, where Republicans' rights have been taken away. Trump's GOP allies nearly repeating those words verbatim as a defense.
What we see in this impeachment is a kangaroo court.
I think it was described today as a kangaroo court, and that's probably being nice.
House Democrats say it's crucial to press forward with their investigation.
The president doesn't make the rules for the House of Representatives. That's the whole point here. Our objective is, in necessity, is that we go through this carefully and develop the evidence before we reach conclusions.
This coming as more details about President Trump's July 25th phone call with Ukraine's president emerge. As first reported in the New York Times, in a memo written by the first whistleblower, a White House official who listened in on the call described it as crazy, frightening, and completely lacking in substance related to national security, adding the official was visibly shaken by what had transpired. Sources tell CNN as soon as President Trump hung up the phone, his administration began a mad dash to prevent fallout from the conversation. And White House lawyers later ordered the transcript of Trump's call be moved to a highly secure server.
And the White House is now gearing up for a long battle ahead. They are contacting outside lawyers to build up their impeachment legal team, and sources telling CNN that one of those individuals, former Congressman from South Carolina, Trey Gowdy, famous for leading the Benghazi investigation. Allison.
All right, Suzanne, thank you very much for all of that background reporting. We'll check back with you. Up next, new details about the scramble in the White House.
This morning, the White House wants the discussion to be about the impeachment process, not the series of developments over the last 24 hours that raise questions about the administration's conduct. Joining us now, CNN political correspondent Abby Phillip and CNN senior political analyst John Avlon. John, where in the Constitution can you point to me that it says that the House has to vote on launching an impeachment inquiry?
That would be nowhere. But the arguments the White House is making are sort of not rooted in the Constitution. I mean,
they're aconstitutional.
Yeah, correct. They're essentially arguing that impeachment is unconstitutional, which I got a little bad news for them. It's definitely not. The Founding Fathers, of course, put this in to hold the executive accountable. The vision of sort of legal constraints on the president they have and are arguing are the president's not accountable. If the president doesn't do it, if the president does it, it's not illegal. They seem to be echoing Nixon even there.
Well, sort of. That's not exactly the wording they're saying. The wording they're saying is that the president, the way it's set up is the president doesn't have access to this evidence. The president can't see what's going on behind closed doors. The president can't call his own witnesses. That's how
you're making almost more of a compelling case than the White House.
No. Go ahead.
The problem with the argument is that they're trying to say we're not going to cooperate until we see all of these things and then we'll evaluate it. They're not even saying that if all of these procedural things are put in place, like they have what they're calling due process, the ability to cross-examine witnesses, that they will even cooperate. So it seems like an argument that the impeachment process on its face is unconstitutional, even though I do think there's, in defense of the Democrats here, there's an argument to be made that this is the fact-finding part of the process. And then there is an impeachment hearing. There is an actual hearing that happens in the Senate. And
then will the president get all of those things that they're demanding?
Absolutely. There's an impeachment trial.
This is what has to be answered, because that's what they're saying.
Here's the thing.
Happening.
It doesn't have to be answered because it's a spurious charge to begin with, and it's aconstitutional.
Fine, but it's our job to shoot these down.
A House impeachment inquiry is a grand jury investigation. In a grand jury-like investigation, there is no lawyer, defense lawyer, present in the room. There is no evidence presented by the defendant. This is an absurd argument the White House is making, so we will talk about it.
That's exactly what I wanted you to do. And not talk about the series of developments over the last 24 hours. Look, we can go with substance, for sure. We can go with substance, and I look forward to doing that. Or we can go with process, which is the process argument that they're making. But I also think we need to shoot that down, because how does that, when you see this letter that they released from their lawyer, I mean, the White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, they make all of these charges that the Democrats aren't doing. And so I think it's helpful to say those aren't supposed to be happening yet.
Correct. I mean, look, it's also worth remembering, for example, the kangaroo court talking point we heard earlier.
Not based on Captain Kangaroo, but...
Yeah, important clarification for those of you who aren't up on your legal history. Look, the Nixon White House called the impeachment proceedings a kangaroo court and a witch hunt. I mean, the echoes are very clear. And this letter was a bit desperate coming from the White House counsel. And I think that's why, we need to acknowledge it for what it is. They are fighting their own sort of ahistorical,
in Trump's mouth. It was sort of like a Jekyll and Hyde type of situation. Some of it was sort of written in a legalistic way, and others it was like, the call was perfect. By the way, the call was perfect. And, but there's no real defense of the substance of what is happening there. The reason there's an impeachment inquiry is because there is a complaint. There are facts that do not look proper, and the White House is not even bothering to address any of that. The process argument, though, I'm not sure how this is really going to move public opinion if that's what they're trying to keep the lid on right now. People don't really care much about process. They care about what looks right and what looks wrong. And right now, a lot of things look wrong.
Do you want to talk
Speaking of,
I do. Look, over the last 24 hours, there's been a huge number of developments, including the CNN story, which goes into the concern in the White House at the time of the phone call, right?
Yeah, this story, by the way, I mean, Pamela Brown, Jason Diamond, Caitlin Collins deserve a lot of credit for this story. It is a deep dive into the atmosphere in the White House surrounding the call in real time. First, the president wakes up, it's 9 a.m. John Bolton, he aren't on speaking terms. So what was intended to be sort of a Russian brushback pitch didn't quite turn out that way. The president uniquely and almost strangely engaged, looking forward to this call. He's trying to figure out why. The call goes down, and there's an immediate freakout among White House staff. And this is where part of the Republicans' argument sort of breaks down, is the call's coming from inside the House, people. It's the White House staff that react with something close to horror at what they apparently heard on this call, because it just crossed so many lines. And the president whistling Dixie on his way out.
Yeah,
well,
I mean,
enter whistleblower. Thank you for that thread. So, and that's where the reporting says that the whistleblower, one of the whistleblowers, or one of the, I guess, officials who reported it to the first whistleblower, felt it was crazy, unsettling, was visibly shaken by the call.
Yeah, and that was something that was told to the whistleblower almost immediately after the call happened. The next day, the whistleblower wrote a memo describing what this official, who was actually on the call, felt about what had gone down in that call. This is so significant because it really adds more meat to the bones about how horrified a lot of people inside the White House were about what happened. They moved immediately to lock the call down, to move it to that code word server. And they did it in part because they knew that the call was, that something was said, things were said on the call that they did not want to talk about, and B, they were concerned that they would have to preserve the records for the future because of potential litigation.
We're going to go to break here. I want to play you to break, though. All right, with Lindsey Graham, not Lindsey Graham, 2019 Lindsey Graham,
old school
Lindsey Graham, who actually thought that Congress had the power to investigate the president. Listen to what Lindsey Graham said back then.
Article 3 of impeachment against Richard Nixon, the article was based on the idea that Richard Nixon, as president, failed to comply with subpoenas of Congress. The day Richard Nixon failed to answer that subpoena is the day that he was subject to impeachment, because he took the power from Congress over the impeachment process away from Congress, and he became the judge and jury.
There you have it. Open and shut. It's open and shut if you listen to Lindsey Graham.
All right, on top of all that, we have major developments in the Democratic border. Kurdish-led forces say the Turks have already begun shelling one of their locations on the border, and they're calling on the international community to help prevent a possible humanitarian disaster. CNN's chief international correspondent Clarissa Ward is live in northern Syria. CNN is the only American network in the country right now. Clarissa, tell us what you're seeing.
Well, as you can imagine, John, the situation is growing increasingly tense, with expectations that a Turkish military invasion of northern Syria could begin any, John, basically calling on everyone here to go and get themselves to the border as soon as possible to protest and to provide resistance to this potentially imminent incursion. We don't know how many people are adhering to that call, but we do know that in the towns of Tel Abyad and Ras Al Ain, those are the towns where this offensive is expected to begin, people are already leaving their homes, trying to get to safer ground, as everybody anxiously awaits what many fear could be a bloodbath, John.
Any sense of how large this operation will be if and when it starts, Clarissa?
Well, it's a very ambitious project, John. The Turks say that they basically want to create a buffer zone along this entire border. That is more than 200 miles long. They want it to be 20 miles deep. This is going to be a massive undertaking. One can only presume that it's going to take quite a bit of time. But the question that everybody is asking is, how much blood will be lost as a result of it? And what, if anything, will the U.S. do to defend its allies, the Kurds, who have been fighting and dying on the front lines in the battle against ISIS, from this military incursion, if indeed it does become a massacre? Allison?
Clarissa, thank you so much for being on the ground for us in Syria to let us know what is really happening there. We will check back with you. Democratic presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders is planning to scale back his campaign events after suffering a heart attack last week. CNN's Ryan Nobles is live in Burlington, Vermont. So, Ryan, is the senator taking a break from the campaign trail?
Allison, right now he's taking a break. He is staying at his home here in Burlington as he recuperates from that heart attack that took place last week. But this did come as a bit of a surprise yesterday as Sanders returned home after a visit with his cardiologist. He told us that he's planning to change the nature of his campaign. Listen to what he had to say.
How are you feeling, Senator? We were doing, in some cases 5 or 6 meetings a day, 3 or 4 rallies and town meetings, and meeting with groups of people. I don't think I'm going to do that. But I certainly intend to be actively campaigning. I think we're going to change the nature of the campaign a bit, make sure that I have the strength to do what I have to do.
Now, before he left for that cardiology appointment, Sanders told us that he was dumb, that he wasn't listening to the signs his body was sending him about a month before that heart attack took place. Now, he's insistent that this doesn't change his resolve to become the next president of the United States. In fact, he would argue that this is going to put him more in line with his Democratic opponents because he was doing far more events than many of the other people in the field. But there are now certainly going to be questions about how this impacts Sanders going forward. Age was already an issue for Sanders, as it is for many of these candidates in the race. In fact, many of the top competitors, including Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, even Donald Trump, are going to be in their 70s on Inauguration Day. But I asked Sanders specifically how he feels voters will view the fact that he is in his 70s and now had a heart attack. He said that voters take everything into account and that he hopes that they look at the totality of his record and that he's a fighter. And he's going to fight through this particular problem as well. And he still has the resolve to become the next president of the United States.
Ryan,
John and Allison?
Ryan, very quickly, he also suffered a family loss. His daughter-in-law died?
Yeah, that's right. That was also a surprise that we learned about yesterday. This would be the wife of his son, Levy. She unexpectedly died after a very unexpected bout with cancer. The news came very quickly. They found out about it Saturday. That's when he returned home here to Burlington. His daughter-in-law has 3 grandchildren, or 3 children, I should say, who are grandchildren of Jane and Bernie Sanders. It's not something that they're talking about very publicly. Levy's wife was a very private person, and they're asking that this information be kept within the family as they mourn this loss. But Allison, to your point, this is another thing that Sanders is dealing with on top of his health issues and the fact that he's running for president.
How devastating. Ryan, okay, thank you very much for that update on Bernie Sanders. Well, Ronan Farrow's long-awaited book is almost out, and in it, a former NBC News employee comes forward with very disturbing allegations, new allegations against former Today Show anchor Matt Lauer. We do have some breaking news. There are new details about an alleged rape by former Today Show host Matt Lauer. A former NBC News staffer tells her story in a new book written by investigative journalist Ronan Farrow. The allegations ultimately led to Matt Lauer being fired from the network. CNN's chief media correspondent Brian Stelter is here with more. These allegations that came out this morning in this excerpt are the most disturbing to date.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Lauer was fired almost 2 years ago. At the time, NBC said it was due to inappropriate sexual behavior at the workplace. What we're hearing now is much more disturbing than just inappropriate. This is from Variety magazine, publishing excerpts overnight from Ronan Farrow's new book. It's called Catch and Kill. It comes out next week. And it has this first interview on the record with Lauer's accuser, of course, former Today Show host Matt Lauer, who was fired 2 years ago. Farrow spoke with a woman whose claim led to the firing. Her name is Brooke Nevels. She's a former NBC News producer and a former assistant to Meredith Vieira. She says she was raped by Matt Lauer while covering the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia. Nevels alleges that it happened after a night of drinking with Vieira and Lauer at a hotel bar. Nevels said she had had 6 shots of vodka and that Lauer invited her up to her room. But according to Farrow, she had no reason to suspect Lauer would be anything but friendly based on prior experience. Nevels then says that once in the room, Lauer forced himself onto her and raped her. Nevels tells Farrow in the book, quote, "It was non-consensual in the sense that I was too drunk to consent." Now, this apparently didn't end there. Nevels tells Farrow that she and Lauer then had other, what she says were consensual sexual encounters. She described them as, quote, "completely transactional." It was not a relationship. Now, Nevels did not immediately report the alleged attack in Sochi to NBC Universal executives. She says she did confide in Vieira 3 years later. Vieira then urged her to get a lawyer and report it to NBC Human Resources, which she did. Now, CNN's reached out to the legal teams for Matt Lauer and for Brooke Nevels for comment. We've not heard back overnight. NBC News has officially declined to comment for now on these new reports, but I believe a statement is in the works. Remember, after the firing 2 years ago, Lauer said this, a statement that read in part, There are no words to express my sorrow and regret for the pain I have caused others by words and actions. To the people I have hurt, I am truly sorry. As I am writing this, I realize the depth of the damage and disappointment I have left behind at home and at NBC. Lauer went on to say, some of what's being said about me is untrue or mischaracterized, but there is enough truth in these stories to make me feel embarrassed and ashamed. I regret that my shame is now shared by the people I cherish deeply. So that's what Lauer said at the time. It was this complaint, which we now know was from this woman named Brooke Nevels, which led NBC to shockingly fire him, seemingly out of nowhere, in November of 2017. But as I mentioned, this was originally described as inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace. The lawyer at the time said this was misconduct. This is the first time we're hearing about the really disturbing details.
It's a violent crime. If this is accurate, this is a violent crime. It's not inappropriate, behavior in the workplace. And it's just really upsetting details.
So, Brian, you said you anticipate a statement coming from NBC. How do you anticipate they will handle this?
Because NBC's been bracing for this Farrow book for several weeks, preparing to tell their side of the story about what happened with Lauer and what happened with Farrow. Remember, Farrow was working for NBC, working on the Harvey Weinstein investigation. NBC let him walk it out of the building to the New Yorker. So a lot of that is still to come. But this is the first time we've heard from this accuser on the record. It's notable that she spoke with Farrow. She also reveals that she was paid 7 figures when she left NBC in 2018. She describes the awkwardness of being at work, people knowing that it was her complaint that led to the firing of the Today Show's biggest star. Of course, the Today Show went on without missing a beat. But this has continued to be an embarrassment, I think, for the network, for NBC. It raises questions about who knew what when, about who Nevels told within the building, and why wasn't there an HR system? It always raises the question in this Me Too age, do women and men feel comfortable coming forward, sharing what they've experienced, sharing what they've heard with the supervisors, with the bosses? It seems in this case, she didn't do that. Maybe she didn't feel comfortable doing that. But now we know for the first time some of the truly disturbing details of this case.
And we should just remind people there are other women who came forward with other misconduct allegations, but this one doesn't. It
was described mostly as harassment at the time. This is the first time we're hearing about rape.
All right, Brian, please keep us posted on this. Again, the book doesn't come out till next week.
Thanks, Brian.
So this morning, the White House is refusing to cooperate with the impeachment inquiry into the president, citing the Constitution to make a constitutional argument. So this morning, the White House is refusing to comply at all with the congressional impeachment inquiry, claiming the probe is both unconstitutional and a violation of due process. The problem with that argument turns out to be the Constitution. Let's discuss with CNN legal analyst Michael Gerhardt. He's a constitutional law professor at the University of North Carolina. Professor, I'm so glad you're here. Can you point me to the part of the Constitution where it says that Congress has to vote to launch an impeachment inquiry?
It's a good question because it's not in the Constitution.
What
the Constitution?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. The Constitution makes it very clear that the House has the sole power to impeach. And that's pretty plain. It means it's up to the House, not the president, what the House does with respect to impeachment. The Constitution also provides the power in the House, or gives the House the power to develop its own rules of internal governance. And so the House has rules. They're following those rules, and all of that is legitimate. The president doesn't get to tell the House what to do.
And again, the issue is that the argument they're making, therefore, is not just a constitutional, but you also suggest it makes the case that the president is above the law. What do you mean?
What I mean by that is if you look at the letter, along with all the other positions the president's been taking over the last several months, they all amount to one thing. The president says he's not going to be accountable in impeachment. He's not going to be accountable in a court because he's refusing to comply with subpoenas to turn over evidence. He's asking aides, directing aides not to testify in front of Congress, to block them from sharing information with Congress. All of that together means that he's basically above the law. That's the argument he's making in his letter.
He allows 0 avenues for oversight, it seems here. There's almost no wiggle room. And not only that, they're offering no guarantee that if the House does what his lawyer claims that they want the House to do, that they'll even comply.
Exactly. He may just keep moving the goalposts. My guess is if the House does something, he'd just simply think of something else to throw at them. And so the only avenue he's leaving himself, rather ironically, is the next presidential election, which is exactly what he's trying to influence by seeking aid from foreign countries to help his reelection.
I want to make one point here is, again, there's another erroneous claim that's being made by the president in this letter, which is that Democrats want to overturn the results of the 2016 election. Impeachment, as written by the founders, is not designed to overturn an election. In fact, what happens if a president is impeached and removed from office?
He returns to private life. He's a private citizen again. If he's convicted and removed by the Senate, then he's automatically out of the presidential office. And so I think the president clearly wants to try to deflect and confuse people by all the different kinds of arguments he's making. But in my opinion, none of them is a good constitutional argument. He simply wants to make his way to the next election and at the same time try and get forward an aid in that election.
And by the way, if a president is removed from office, which has never happened, the elected vice president of the United States takes over. So it doesn't overturn the results of the election. In fact, it would validate the results of the previous election. That's why a vice president is elected, among other things. When we're talking about congressional oversight, I want to play you sound from a former member of Congress who seemed to think that the executive branch of government needed to comply with congressional oversight. Let's listen to this.
The notion that you can withhold information and documents from Congress, no matter whether you're the party in power or not in power, is wrong. Respect for the rule of law must mean something irrespective of the vicissitudes of political cycles.
Now, that happened to be former Congressman Trey Gowdy, who some reports say will serve as an outside counsel to the president on impeachment. And unless my ears were mistaken, he seemed to be arguing that Congress does have oversight responsibility that must be respected by the executive.
That's exactly what he was arguing then. Also recall that the third article of impeachment approved against Richard Nixon by the House Judiciary Committee had charged Nixon with failing to comply with a legislative subpoena. There's a long history of the House and the Senate, for that matter, taking the position that other officials must comply with their subpoenas because they're lawful. And in not complying with those subpoenas, the president is breaking the law.
And then very last question, quickly, what recourse at this point does Congress have?
The only recourse it has, besides subpoenaing people and doing more fact-finding, is to turn to its impeachment inquiry to try and develop as much information as it can, as much facts as it can, to build a record to kind of connect the dots and see if that leads to impeachment.
All right, Professor Michael Gerhardt, we look forward to leaning on you throughout this process to understand what actually is written down in the Constitution, because it turns out it's probably going to be very important here. Thank you, sir.
All right, an alligator-filled moat, an electrified wall, shooting migrants